Malware and cyber attacks. So malware refers to any computer program designed to surreptitiously or maliciously enter a digital device. Uh, the action carried out by malware code is referred to as malware exploit or payload. So this is the main bad action of the malware. Usually malware will include other functions, other processes to maybe send itself out to others, or may have its own encryption algorithm and so on. So it may be more or less a complex software program, but the main bad part of the code is called the exploit or payload. And let's just to highlight here, right? Mal means malicious, and ware, software, malware, malicious software. Now, there are different types of malware. The common ones are viruses, which takes over computer functions or can install themselves and carry out different functions that are undesirable. Maybe delete content, move content, and so on, send content out over the internet. Worms, which self-replicate themselves across computers. They can send themselves via emails without you knowing. And then Trojans, which the name suggests from the Trojan horse, installs what is called the backdoor to the infected computer, allowing other intruders or hackers to communicate with the infected computer and steal data from it. Now, usually the malware would kind of include one or many of these kinds of functionalities or characteristics. So let's take an example here of a warm kind of malware. So maybe it can just be an email. It can be part of an email attachment. You don't recognize it. You click on it and it actually can infect your computer and then send itself over to others or perform undesirable functions as well. You can get them from a website as well. Maybe if you're going more sketchy websites, but sometimes even legitimately looking websites, or sometimes the worm can be in a local area network, maybe in the network of your computers in your office, of your business, and in fact, other computers that way. So there are different ways for the worm to propagate. The Trojan, once again, can be propagated via worm-like characteristics, but it has that particularity of the backdoor. So let's look at an example here, a famous example of the so-called Stuxnet Trojan, Stuxnet virus. And you may have a computer and you have this very strong, complex software malware that is in the USB drive, and you put it in the computer, and then after you do that, the computer knows itself to install in the background. And the dropper is the payload of the exploit, that bad part of the malware. And then a security hole. So security hole, another word for this is vulnerability, which is kind of like, as the word suggests, kind of like a fault, shortcoming in Windows operating system actually runs the dropper, runs the exploit. It doesn't stop it from being installed when the USB comes in because it doesn't recognize, because it's a vulnerability, didn't know. 3, the dropper execute a second file containing a worm, and this worm is going to enable it to propagate. So once again, the Stuxnet is a very complex program. It has all kinds of things going on. The worm spreads through the local area network looking for a specific type of hardware device that Stuxnet is designed to destroy. So maybe the Stuxnet is looking for a kind of mechanical device, for example, to control temperatures of nuclear reactors. And it has, those computers are of a specific kind that the Stuxnet is looking for. When the worm arrives at a target device, in this case a centrifuge, once again, look, it downloads a more comprehensive file containing instructions for the payload. So this is a very complex example of a very famous software malware called the Stuxnet, and the malware payloads cause the nuclear centrifuge to fuel or whatever other kind of systems like electronic systems or various other kinds of systems. You can do that too as well. So let's talk about cyber attack. A cyber attack is an intrusion or disruption of someone's computer and its programs via the internet. So cyber attack usually involves active operation of an individual or group of individuals, and maybe even within an organization such as the CIA in the United States and the internet organization in for the Russian government. So they may use malware specific malicious software, but not necessarily. They can actually, there are various ways for intruders to probe and attempt entry into other computers that are connected to the internet. And here I have an actual image of these probes and these kinds of attacks that computers are conducting on each other in a daily basis. There's thousands of them going back and forth. Computers in the US government attacking Chinese computers, people in Chinese with Chinese computers attacking other American companies and governments as well. This happens back and forth all day long. And that's just a feature of the internet today. So there are many ways for malware intrusion and cyber attacks. And we'll talk more about this later as well. So clicking a fake web link that downloads the malware, or attacker gaining access to a computer with stolen hacked passwords. Somebody gets your password, they can use it to go into your bank account and things like that. Use an infected USB drive, as we talked about it before, or using a zero-day attack, which uses previously unknown vulnerabilities in software applications. So for example, you have a new app maybe didn't really have all the security features and allows hackers or intruders to install themselves via the new app and get access to computers and devices. So there's a relationship between passwords and attacks. So a lot of attacks actually use what's so-called a brute force attack, which is a password cracking software to generate every possible combination of characters. So if a computer is trying to access your account, maybe you're a very rich person, or you're a very rich company, and if they reach in, they can steal information, and they can steal valuable data or manipulate transactions. So you just try every possible combination of character. Why not? And then eventually you get in. Now the problem is that this can take days, weeks, or months, or years, and some people don't want to do that for years. But this is called a brute force attack, and this is why it's important to have strong passwords. There are other kinds of password attacks. So for example, using a dictionary that help get hackers guess password by stepping through a dictionary containing common words. This is why it's not good to use just basic common words like password or beauty or I am beautiful and stupid words like that are just common. Because there are dictionaries out there for that and they can be easily figured out. There are other kinds of scams and hoaxes out there. So it's an antivirus scam and hoax. So some virus threats are very real, but you're also likely to get email messages about so-called viruses that don't really exist. A virus hoax usually arrives as an email message containing dire warnings about a supposedly new virus on the loose, or maybe some bad action you did that you need to contact them about. Do not forward email with malware to others or with these hoaxes, except to your IT security department. So you may receive some of these as emails, says a warning, a destructive virus is spreading fast. Or you downloaded a virus and you need to click here this link to fix that. Be very careful about these kinds of scams. Other kinds of issues of malware and cyber attacks include address spoofing. So this is changing an originating address or destination address to redirect the flow of data between two parties. So in the context of security exploits, address spoofing can take place on various levels of a communication. So we'll talk about two kinds of spoofing here: the email address spoof, which changed the sender's address. The spoofed address masks the source of spam, and I'll give you an example here after the slide. And then also you can do an IP address or URL spoof, which modifies the source IP address or URL of where content actually connects to. So for example, you may have a host A that has source IP 172.151.6. That's the legitimate source of the information. And then the destination IP, which is this one here, 10.0.0.25. Now, another computer can spoof the source ID, which is use this somebody else's IP address, even though its own IP address is different, of course, because it's a different computer, and then trick the server into thinking that this host B is actually host A. and then the server can authenticate, but it authenticates incorrectly or false authentication. That's IP address spoofing. And also the email spoofing can be, there's two forms. There's a strong and a weak. And let's talk about the strong first. The strong is when actually the sender of the message can create a spoofed email like this from Bill Gates. So you may actually receive a message that reads from bill@microsoft.com, which looks really legitimate, bill@microsoft.com. Okay, so if you get an email like this, it still may be spoofed, still may be fake, because there are ways for others to spoof their email. So you got to be careful when you even receive an email from people that may seem legitimate. Now that's the strong form of real spoofing. Now there's also a weak form, and you got to be careful for these as one too. So I'm sorry, this is not so clear, but for example, you may see that a service here, you may get an email from example, paypals.co.uk. And then you can see that the link here looks like it's linking to PayPal, www.paypal.com, and looks legitimate like the real PayPal company. But if you hover the mouse over, you see that the link is going to pr.atwo totally not PayPal. And look also that it doesn't have HTTPS, this is HTTP connection. So it's really important to hover the mouse over the actual link to see the actual address that it's going to. And it's also redirecting, you see redirection to two different sites here. So once you click the link, you're actually doing all kinds of connections to computers that are trying to attack you. So that's address spoofing. There are other kinds of cyber attacks we should be aware about. So the RATs, remote access Trojans. So essentially, these are just Trojans that install a backdoor that enable people to download information from your own machine and device and steal information. There are things that are ransomware, which lock a device and then request payment for unlocking. And you may have heard about these from the internet, from the news stories, and companies like meat packing companies in the United States and all other kinds of electricity companies and governments are being attacked. This is a huge kind of issue right now for lots of companies. Other kinds of attacks include botnet attacks, which is when various computers are taken over by hackers and are used to attack even other computers. And this is also called the distributed denial of service attack. So the attack floods a legitimate website with lots of connections, so its traffic stops. So if you really don't like a competitor, you don't like somebody's business, you may actually employ this DDoS attack. So the attacker takes over just a bunch of infected machines, just computer people, maybe older people, or people who don't know, or younger people who don't know how to apply security protections. And these computers, sometimes called slave computers, but kind of not a good term anymore, so we call them infected machines. Those are used to attack a victim, a web server. So it runs out of bandwidth and memory because there's so many connections to it, but they're not legitimate. So there are many impacts of malware. They're really bad, and you can kind of go over the list here by yourself. I'll leave the list here. From sort of lower level, displaying irritating messages, to really bad issues like recording your keystrokes, to stealing passwords and disabling antivirus software. There's another page here of all of these impact of malwares, and they are difficult and problematic, but there are ways to address them, and we'll examine these later. So see you next time.